Greetings, citizens, and thanks for tuning in to Nindie Nation. I'm Jeff, and today we're running down our 10 favorite indie games that released on the Nintendo Switch in 2023. Sound off in the comments with your favorites from the last year, and subscribe to keep up to date with every noteworthy Nindie in our regular weekly show. Click like and share this video to help us grow. With all that out of the way, let's get into it. These are Nindie Nation's top 10 games of 2023. In this year's list, you'll find a couple brand new ideas, games that blend multiple elements into something unique, and then games like Ember Knights, which take a tried-and-true formula and polishes it to a high sheen. The first release by Canadian developer Doom Turtle, awesome name by the way, is a top-down hack-and-slash action RPG that's just as fun on your own as it is with up to 4 players at a time. After the evil sorcerer Praxis shatters the land, it's up to the Ember Knights to enter the now hostile lands to vanquish his evil once and for all. The game is a roguelite, so you've got a few biomes to tackle, like the grasslands, a haunted house, an ice world, and the like, and each has their own mini-boss, shop, and a final boss to tackle. Structured just like so many other games in the genre, after you defeat waves of enemies in each screen, you'll be presented with an option to choose which type of reward you want in the next room. This could be stat increases or any number of magic spells, as well as the 2 types of currency meant to be used either in run or for permanent upgrades back at the hub world. What makes Ember Knights so much fun, though, is how tight the gameplay is, and how well balanced of a challenge it provides. You pick between 6 different weapons, each with their own combos, charge attacks, and special abilities, and they vary to the extent that the axe or sword almost feel like an entirely different game than playing with the magic wand or bow and arrow. The pacing is outstanding in Ember Knights, and the presentation is wonderful. And with so many rewards or upgrades to unlock, it all culminates in an action RPG roguelite that absolutely nails the feeling of just one more run. Rogue Games, founded in 2017 by IGN co-founder Matt Casamassina, has been making waves in the mobile space, but in 2023, they really proved themselves in the console space with several exciting new indies. One of the first to release last year was our number 9 game, Dust and Neon by David Marquardt. Even as I'm writing this in January 2024, it's still sitting in my Switch's home row because I'm constantly going back to it almost a full year later. Rocking a super cool cyberpunk robot meets cowboy gunslinger vibe, it's an isometric twin-stick shooter with a couple significant aspects that make it really stand out. Now, while it also employs a roguelite structure, it's your weaponry that really changes throughout each run, as you're exposed to a variety of firepower that would make even Borderlands blush, but then when you die, you start over with whatever guns and perks you've earned back at the base. You'll grab your gear and head to the mission board, where you pick from missions like stopping a train heist, sabotaging enemy bombs, or generally just mowing down a camp of villainous robots. But then it's when you're in the mission that you'll see just how differently this game plays. It's predominantly a cover-based shooter, so if you go in guns blazing, you're not gonna last very long. But the combination of running and sliding into cover, breaking into buildings, and then swapping between weapons with a visceral manual reload system all make this game feel exciting in each and every encounter. The stakes are always high, the pressure is always on, and it never gets boring. Dust and Neon might actually pull off a whole new type of subgenre, with its visuals and gameplay both in moment-to-moment shootouts and in the way it handles the meta progression. It bears some resemblance to West of Dead in terms of combat, but I think it takes the concept much further. If you're into roguelites and you're looking for something different, this is definitely one you've got to try. Number 8 brings with it many caveats, because Lost Epic certainly isn't for everyone. But boy was it for me. Developed by Japanese studio Team Earth Wars, which is in itself a smaller team of the also independent 1or8 Inc., I'm really skirting the lines of if this game is technically an indie. But after I spent over 50 hours with this 2D action RPG, I just had to put it on this list. While it can be described as a Metroidvania, I'd first describe it as a 2D character action game because of its deep combat system and endless customization of gear, weapons, and traversal mechanics. The story itself is anime as hell, centered around dark versus light, good versus evil, that old chestnut. And if I'm being honest, I skipped over most of it because the character voices got on my nerves. What I loved about it though is how huge the game is and just how much fun it was to explore its gorgeous environments. It's all backed by a pretty good soundtrack and plenty of sufficient systems which will help you keep track of where you're going and all the various side quests you can tackle along the way. And there's even crafting and cooking mechanics, which I usually don't care for, but just like everything else in this game, something about its approach just felt nostalgic and satisfying. Now, if you prefer a tighter, shorter Metroidvania with awesome combat, stick around until later in this video. But if you're the type to enjoy a massive exploration action platformer that encourages you to fill out 100% of its maps and quest logs, and you don't mind a game that's described as anime as hell, check out Lost Epic, because I think you'll have a good time. Touch on some of this list's outliers here in a little bit, but the 7th best indie I played in 2023 was one that I had spent dozens of hours on already in 2022. After their woefully underrated Unruly Heroes flew under far too many of your radars in 2019, I was very excited to see what Magic Design Studio was cooking up next. I was even more excited when I learned that not only was it a side-scrolling action platformer built with roguelite and RPG systems that structurally sits somewhere between Dead Cells and Hades, but that it also leveraged the studio's excellent sense of humor and visual design. I was really excited to check out Have a Nice Death, and boy did this game deliver. Even after playing it for a year in early access on PC, I couldn't wait to start all over again on the Switch back in March, and found myself putting even more time into it on the Switch than I had on my Steam Deck. The gist is that you play as Death, you know, the Reaper of Souls, and Death is of course the CEO of Death Inc., which has turned the afterlife into a parody of modern corporate structures to the extent that Death is no longer doing what he loves most, that being the aforementioned reaping of said souls, and rather his day-to-day is loaded with corporate obligations, business strategy, and worst of all, paperwork. After some of the Underworld's minions start going rogue, Death takes up his scythe once again to put his subordinates back in their place. You run through areas that are sometimes straightforward, sometimes full of branching paths, and sometimes a sprawling vertical environment to reach the elevator that will take you to the next stage. After several floors, you'll reach a boss, which is probably my favorite part of the game. The humor, wit, and dialogue are so on point here, as if the writer's inspirations are a cross between The Office, Office Space, and Dilbert as you face off against big corporate-themed bosses, like Mr. Gordon Grimes, who oversees environmental sustainability, or my absolute favorite and the first boss you'll face, the head of security, Brad. Brad is the best, y'all. In a crowded genre full of contemporaries, if Have a Nice Death does anything different, it's either the humor or the way your attacks build combos that allow for so much movement within battle. You'll really find yourself charging and dashing and flying all over the screen when things get hectic, and with so many weapon classes all having their own upgrade paths, you'll never run out of new stuff to tinker with. For all you Nindie roguelite connoisseurs out there, don't let this one pass you by. There is plenty of paperwork to be done. And rounding out the bottom half of our top 10 Nindies in 2023 is a game that, hey, if I've ever steered you wrong in the past, then fine, ignore this game. But if I haven't, and you happen to like JRPGs even a little bit, This Way Madness Lies is one of my favorite Nindie RPGs. It comes from Zeboyd Games, whose previous titles include Cosmic Star Heroine and Cthulhu Saves Christmas, and if you've ever played either of those, that's exactly what you should expect more of in this latest adventure. Set to the banger of a soundtrack composed by Joshua Queen, you play as Imogen, a typical high school girl doing typical high school girl things, who also happens to be the leader of her high school drama club. As their production season reaches Romeo and Juliet, monsters invade the play, and we see Imogen and her friends transform into magical girls a la Sailor Moon. From there, you're treated to an impeccably paced story navigating through several of Shakespeare's plays with a formula of hanging out with friends at school, going into the play's world, coming back out for some story and to figure out who the boss of that particular play is, then diving back in to defeat said boss. And each chapter is maybe 45 minutes long. Accessibility options make the game approachable for those with any level of JRPG experience, and the fourth wall breaking dialogue, alongside a feature that lets you translate Shakespearean English into modern-day bro-speak, will have you constantly amused at the game's so-bad-it's-good humor. The combat is reminiscent of Final Fantasy VI, or of course the other Zeboyd games, and you get the whole experience, 7 plays, each with their own story arc, all in about 7 or 8 hours with some post-game challenges and a New Game Plus mode. If you just so happen to be looking for yet another excuse to pick up this awesome, high-quality JRPG with a truly unique premise, amazing soundtrack, and outstanding writing that will keep you smiling throughout its near-flawless pacing, its list price is only $10. Need I say more? Moving on to our number 5 pick, we've now reached the segment where any of these games could have ended up as our Game of the Year, and they all come highly recommended. Right at the end of last year, I caught the old Rona and missed an episode, but the game from that week that may have otherwise flown under my radar came recommended to me by random from the Nindie Nation Discord, so thank you, sir. Wall World is such an interesting and simple game, but I also think it's one that may not sound fun at first, and playing is definitely believing. Developed by Alawar and easily the best title in their library, it's a good old Nindie trifecta, which means it includes procedurally generated levels, roguelike mechanics, and very light RPG elements. In a far-flung, Matrix-like future, humanity lives along a seemingly endless wall, and you're a wall digger who travels up and down the wall on a robo-spider mining for resources. Any given run in Wall World can last up to 60 minutes, and is largely broken up into 3 20-minute segments. At the start, you'll go into a mine where you can float around in your jetpack, and similar to SteamWorld Dig, you'll harvest as many resources as you can carry, then exit the mine. When you exit, you're back in your robo-spider where you'll either climb further up or down the wall, with each direction having its own unique resources. Occasionally, you'll find a small room with a one-off upgrade, and every few minutes an alarm will alert you that the enemies known as Zyrex are approaching. At that point, you retreat back to the robo-spider and fight them off until repeating the cycle once again. Every 20 minutes, the World Eater shows up and is kind of your checkpoint for permanent progression. After a few runs, you should be able to defeat the first one, and eventually most of your runs will end with the final encounter after all 3 20-minute cycles have completed. Most of the gameplay here is floating around a 2D space using twin-stick controls to destroy rocks, then suck up the resources. And when you're fighting in the Robo-Spider, you're mostly relying on whatever upgrades you've unlocked that run. Both your character and the Robo-Spider can earn upgrades to damage, speed, healing, and defense, and you're constantly unlocking new weapons and special attacks that will assist you in battle. The fixed structure, though, is what makes this game so great. The pacing of 20 to 60 minutes at a time led to Wall World melting hours away from me more than any other game did in 2023. The campaign tasks you with making it to the top and bottom of the wall, as well as defeating the World Eater, which is locked behind a progression requirement that should take most people about 10 to 12 hours to achieve. The difficulty does skew a bit on the tougher side, but there's more than enough to unlock that you'll always feel like you're progressing, even if it takes you a while to get the hang of things. With a unique combination of gameplay elements that can feel borderline therapeutic, and a refined structure that makes it easy to pick up and play, but always hard to put down, Wall World is a unique, engrossing game that will immediately prove itself to you, and hopefully grab you just as much as it did me. you've watched this channel for a while, you'll know that I always include some kind of fast-paced action game in my top 5, because at the end of the day, sometimes I'm just in the mood for some mindless pick-up-and-play fun, as we've seen with games like Mighty Goose in years past. That game this year comes in at number 4 with Gravity Circuit by Domesticated Ant Games. Gravity Circuit takes its foundation from the Mega Man X, or more appropriately, the Mega Man Zero games, and piles on some fun tools to keep combos in the air and on the ground going, and then tops it all off with a grappling hook. And it's an awesome grappling hook. What's more, just like Mighty Goose, Gravity Circuit also has an incredible soundtrack, which makes sense as both games were composed by Dominic Ninmark, and few modern composers can capture that 16-bit synth rock as well as he can. Just like its inspirations, Gravity Circuit starts you in a tutorial level that sets the stage for the story. Then you find yourself in a base where you pick from 8 robot masters to tackle, each with their own level mechanics. You won't pick up their abilities after defeating them, but there is a slew of interesting upgrades and gadgets to purchase back at the base. The way you marry those upgrades together can have a major impact on how you play the game. With so many secrets in each level, sometimes you want to negate damage from traps while extending the reach of your grappling hook. Sometimes you're focused on clearing the time attack scores, so you increase movement speed and upgrade your close range attacks. And sometimes you'll find a balance of melee, grappling hook, special attacks, defense, and locomotion abilities, and just stick with that combo. But whatever you build, you can swap between multiple presets just by pausing the game, so your options are many. If you just blow through the game, it'll last you about 3 hours, and if you aim to collect everything, you're looking at maybe 5. I, however, completed the game, then tackled all the collectibles, then tackled New Game Plus, and found an almost entirely different experience in each run and racked up close to 10 hours. When I look back on the year, I try to think of games that impacted me the most, which games innovated, and which games are just easy recommendations, and you'll see those scattered all throughout this video. But when it comes to Gravity Circuit, this game is high up on the list because it's just downright fun from start to finish, and then again multiple times over. If you and the Blue Bomber go way back, or you fell in love with Zero on the GBA, you absolutely need to play Gravity Circuit. And for anyone else outside of Rockman's orbit, know that Gravity Circuit is an exciting action platformer chock full of content with impressive production and enough options to make it accessible to anyone. Moving into the top 3 of 2023, if it's an exploration platformer with challenging combat that you're after, Elderand was absolutely the best one I played in 2023. Ringing all the bells for video game subgenre buzzwords, developers Mantra and Synergia deliver that Metroidvania experience, complete with heavy, methodical Souls-like combat, and I never found myself lost for too long in its Lovecraftian world of dark magic and cultish shenanigans. And while the challenge certainly ramps up on occasion, I never found that frustrating either. I went into Elderand trying to play it like Symphony of the Night, but just like so many games in this genre, it's the early stages of the game where you're the weakest. Now that usually frustrates me, but in Elderand, I found it helped me grasp the deliberate combat, complete with its dodging and helpful but not required to master parry system. There's 3 things that I look for in my favorite games of this genre, which Elderand delivered in spades. 1, an open world that's actually open and doesn't use gear gating to lock you in a set path. And just like my 2021 Game of the Year, Astalon Tears of the Earth, I found a world that always gave me options. Sure, most players will have a similar experience, but there are multiple times where paths branch and 2 players could easily face a couple of hours of different content before crossing those paths again. 2, the variety in weaponry and how it builds into the RPG systems. Fighting, whether venturing into a new area, backtracking, or just straight up grinding a room over and over, never felt pointless or frustrating and always provided me with worthwhile experience or loot drops. Combine that with an arsenal of swords, spears, axes, magic, bow and arrow, and even a whip that's really fun to use, I would frequently take a break from exploration just to get acquainted with a new loadout. And the game does a great job of letting you get creative with your build without hurting the pace of your adventure. And then 3, just how much stuff there is to do. You get quest boards and side quests galore with NPCs from various factions that deliver a series of game-spanning quests, and almost all of them pay off handsomely if you take the time to complete them. There's combat arenas, platforming challenges that err on the easier side but are still fun to complete, and a well-designed quest log to help you keep track of what to keep an eye out for based on where you are in the world. All of these pieces combine to make a game that admittedly took me a couple hours to grasp and really start enjoying, but once I did, I stretched out the game's content to 100% completion and then immediately started a New Game Plus campaign. How Long to Beat suggests Elder End can be finished in as little as 5 hours, but I think most people will be closer to 8 or so, as you'll want to do at least some side quests, and if you love it as much as I did, there's an easy 15 plus hours to sink your teeth into. If you happen to be keeping track, the second you saw or heard the wonder that is Astral Ascent, you knew what was coming in at number 1. But before we get there, let me tell you about my experience with Hibernian Workshop's, dare I say, masterpiece. After being on my radar since early access began on Kickstarter in 2021, I jumped into Astral Ascent as soon as it released on Switch, November 14th of 2023. I really liked the fast-paced, side-scrolling roguelite combat and was captivated by the production on display, but there was a lot to take in. I reached the final boss a few times but never defeated it, and after about 15 hours, I got pulled into another game. But then, a month later, I had a hankering for more of that action and decided to do a little research. I read some wikis and found a new home on the Astral Ascent subreddit, and armed with more knowledge of the game's systems, the game straight up vaporized another 50 hours. And after over 70 runs in the game, there are few Nindies that I've put more time into than Astral Ascent. It takes place in a land called the Garden, which is actually a prison guarded by the 12 Zodiacs and a brutal final boss, making this structure just one of the many ways the game is strikingly similar to Hades. In fact, not to be reductive here, as so many outlets have claimed every great new roguelite is the next Hades, Astral Ascent really is probably best described as 2D Hades. Moving around the world, dashing, jumping, and chaining combos, bouncing off obstacles, latching onto moving platforms, then dive-bombing into enemies. The game just feels like an absolute dream to play. It's so fast and so fluid. Just the feeling of playing it is a reward unto itself. You'll work your way through 4 biomes, each with 12 stages that usually end by picking what type of reward you want in the next room, and that is where the game can get tricky. You've got 4 wildly different characters, 2 focused on short-range combat and 2 for long-range, and then you have so many ways to structure your build because you have 4 spells to slot, each with perks, elements, and dozens of modifiers to change what they do. Then you've got auras, which are like always-on status buffs that usually form the foundation for any given build. And then you've got Zodiacs to summon, echoes, which are like always-on support from Zodiacs, and all of it takes a long time to get the hang of. Thankfully though, the core gameplay is so much fun that I just tell anyone interested in the game to just play it. Start getting used to your favorite character, start unlocking upgrades, and then when you start to hit a wall, that's when you're ready to dig into the deeper systems. Presentation-wise, Astral Ascent is on a whole nother level. The voice acting is outstanding, again giving Hades a run for its money in terms of mythical beings who all want to seem to bone down with each other, with dialogue that is witty and always worth listening to. My girl Andromeda, who runs the bar, yeah, she's my favorite. Then there's the soundtrack. Boy oh boy, there's the soundtrack. Dale North, who sits comfortably among my top 3 favorite Nindie composers, having worked on Sparklight, Dreamscaper, and Wargroove to name a few, brings a level of maturity and grandeur to the game with swells and transitions that make it feel like he's sitting next to me composing the music as I'm playing. And after 70 hours, I've yet to even remotely tire of hearing it. I was surprised to see Astral Ascent land at number 2, even though I knew it'd be on the list after my initial sessions in November. But it's pretty rare that I get into the meta, reading message boards and watching videos to learn how the pros play like I did with this game. and I love the way it balances progression with your own ability, as it perfectly walks the line between your upgrades, a bit of luck, and your own skill so that every accomplishment feels earned and rewarding. I even had a blast playing the 2-player co-op, both with people who are brand new to the game and those hardened veterans like myself. Astral Ascent isn't just one of my favorite games this year, it's become one of my favorite roguelites, thanks to how great it feels to play, how sky-high the production just oozes out of every aspect of it, and how, even when I'm not playing it, I'm wishing I was. Before we get to number 1, let's talk about some honorable mentions, just to get ahead of some of your comments. Vampire Survivors is amazing, yes, but there's no shortage of content you can find about the game, and since I already had played over 100 hours on other platforms before it came to Switch last summer, I decided to make room for other games that deserved the spotlight. In fact, if you're hunting for something like Vampire Survivors, might I suggest Army of Ruin? The game takes the general be the bullet hell approach of Vampire Survivors and gives it a nice visual upgrade while adding a massive quest structure that gives you a lot of ways to approach its various missions, which I found very engaging after spending so much time with games like this in 2023. It's a little janky on the performance side, but after messing with some of the visual options, I did get it right where I needed it to be for my preferences, and this one comes with a decent-sized demo too, so be sure to give it a shot the next time you're in the mood for this kind of game. I also spent a ton of time playing Alien Hominid Invasion this year, on my own, on the couch with my son, and online, which is something I rarely do. This game is tough as nails, so you better be ready for a challenge, but if you are familiar with the type of games the Behemoth makes, whether it be Castle Crashers or Alien Hominid, which also got an HD port to the Switch this year, I think you'll love the way they turned this action-packed run-and-gun series basically into a roguelike extraction game. It's not for everyone, but it did definitely get its hooks in me. On the side of retro-inspired Nindies, there are 2 games you should keep an eye out for. Death Wish Enforcers is straight-up Sunset Riders, the amazing early 90s arcade game by Konami. Except this version is built to be a console game, so the difficulty is a lot more forgiving, the game has far more content, and the whole thing is dressed in a cool grindhouse style that works really well. Just, don't play it around your kids, because this game's got boobies galore. Also, just because it released as a native Sega Genesis game, don't sleep on Astro Bros. This is a side-scrolling action platformer that looks and feels like any 16-bit game you'd rent from Blockbuster and play over a weekend. Only this one is a tried-and-true roguelite, giving you 3 character classes to choose from and several biomes to explore. It's pretty hard, like very old-school difficult, where every mistake you make turns into a lesson learned as you adjust to the way the game plays. However, it all feels so finely tuned and well-balanced that while it is absolutely geared towards fans of 16-bit games, if you fall in that category, this should be right up your alley. You want some more recommendations of great Switch Nindies released in 2023? Check out our video covering the 5 games that just missed this video's top 10 list. And with that out of the way, that leaves only 1 game left to talk about today, and citizens, I'll be honest here, I'm not sure if I have anything unique to say about Sea of Stars. Besides being my favorite game of 2023, it's a timeless classic that fans of JRPGs will be talking about for decades to come, just like the games that inspired it. Seriously, how great is Sabotage Studio? First, they set out to riff on Ninja Gaiden, ultimately delivering a time-traveling epic that blends 8 and 16-bit genres into The Messenger, one of the best games of 2018 and an all-time great among the 2D action genre. Then they set out to make the game that they apparently always dreamed of, and if I could say only one thing about Sea of Stars, it would have to be that love and passion emanate throughout every inch of this game. Clearly and heavily inspired by Super Mario RPG, Chrono Trigger, and Breath of Fire, Sea of Stars is a traditional 16-bit JRPG, but since it's on modern platforms, it may be a bit closer to what we'd expect from the 32-bit CD-ROM-based systems of the time. A coming-of-age story that follows 2 best friends training their whole lives to keep the peace in their world, you naturally begin your quest right around the time that Age of Peace comes to an end. From there, the story spans vastly across time and space, while Valere and Zale travel with their best friend Garl and meet a wonderful but small cast of characters who help tell one of the best stories I've experienced in gaming in a long, long time. There are a lot of tropes, sure, and that's by design, but it was the writing and the characters themselves that kept my interest much more than the story of good versus evil, and you'll be hard-pressed to find one conversation that isn't even the least bit entertaining or compelling. Just like the other all-time JRPG classics, Sea of Stars nails its pacing, and while it's longer than the aforementioned inspirations, it does an excellent job of keeping the stakes high and the urgency at just the right level, so you know when to push ahead and when it might be okay to do a little bit of side questing. The combat system is similar to Super Mario RPG, with 3 party members on screen at a time waiting for their turn to act, and every action having a unique animation that, with a properly timed button press, allows said action to be amplified, which means your attention is required for every battle, which is a big reason why grinding is virtually non-existent. Just like his work on The Messenger, Rainbow Dragon Eyes provides another immaculate soundtrack, and the team at Sabotage was actually able to get Yasunori Mitsuda, composer of Chrono Trigger, to provide a portion of the soundtrack which sounds like a natural extension of what he wrote for Chrono Cross, and all of it is outstanding. The combat is fun, the pacing is on point, the characters are fleshed out to a point of feeling real, the visuals, I mean, you can see the pixel art for yourself, the soundtrack is an instant classic, and the story will stick with you long after the credits roll. What else is there to say? If you're new to JRPGs, Sea of Stars probably isn't the best place to start. For that, I'd probably suggest This Way Madness Lies or Cosmic Star Heroine. But for everyone else, I can't recommend this game highly enough. And that's why Sea of Stars is Nindie Nation's 2023 Game of the Year. So what have you played from today's video? Are you adding any of these games to your wish list? Sound off in the comments down below, and if you participated in our Game of the Year contest, the winners will be posted on the YouTube community page as well as the Nindie Nation Discord. If you're new to Nindie Nation, our goal is to help you navigate Nintendo's train wreck of an eShop, so every week we pour through the new releases and publish a video on Wednesday highlighting the new games that might be worth checking out. If that sounds up your alley, hit the subscribe button to join us in the Nation of Nindie, because citizens, we're all done for today. Thank you so much for watching, liking, subscribing, and sharing Nindie Nation with others. Until next time, I'm Jeff. This has been Nindie Nation's Top 10 Games of 2023, and remember, no matter what type of game you're looking for, Nindie Nation will be right here to help you find just the thing to keep your Joy-Cons synced.